Hey guys, it's Michael, and this is going to be my review on the YJ MGC 4x4. Okay, so first things first, I got this on Saturday and I filmed an unboxing for it, but I found that I really couldn't come to any significant conclusion of the puzzle of whether or not it's worth buying or anything, because I can just stop it right here. If you're someone who's looking into getting into 4x4 for the first time, you really don't need to see any sort of unboxings. And this is $20. There's no debate about it. Out of the box, it's good. In this review, the first thing I want to look at is basically the piece construction. So when you take a look at the pieces between each edge wing, there is a very, very small gap, which I don't see in other 4x4s. When you see that little small gap in between like edge pieces, usually that means that the plastic kind of bent. The quality control isn't very good. You see it in a lot of budget puzzles, for example, like that little gap in between pieces. And I really thought that's the case here. But the reason why there's a gap between the pieces is because this has a very interesting design. So if you can see, this part right here is actually, it's a little bit of a track, but they placed the track of this edge on the very outer portion of the edge. So right here, if you combine these two together, you can actually see it will show up on camera. There's just a weird gap just hanging out right here. I'm not really sure exactly why they decided to make it like this. You can actually really notice the gap when you have the puzzle right in front of you, not in front of a camera or anything, or like in a puzzle review. But it's just something worth noting. It is not quality control because it's a budget puzzle. It is just because of the design of this puzzle. There's a gap in between the edges. However, speaking of quality control, there is one thing that I noticed. If you buy this puzzle and you are not a beginner, actually if you're a beginner, maybe you should do it too. I mean, at some point you're probably gonna have to learn. This big internal piece, when I took it apart to clean out, there was flash on one of the big internal pieces. It was like plastic flash to where like it was kind of a bump right around here. And then it was only for one of the pieces. So for every other internal piece, the construction was fairly consistent. For that single internal piece, since there was flash, I decided to sand it down with like a diamond file. I just didn't want that little small plastic protrusion to grind on any of the pieces, such as you can see how close together the center pieces run along on top of the internal big piece. So it might just be for me. It might not happen for any of the other puzzles. But what I recommend is when you take apart your puzzle to clean out, part of it is to double check on all the internal pieces to make sure that there's no flash in them. And if there is some significant flash, to sand it down. Because if you leave them unkept, it might actually affect the performance of your puzzle. Alright, so the next thing I want to go over real quick is the weight of this puzzle. As you guys can tell from my Megaminx review, I make a big deal about the weight. So if you go to a scale, like for me, it's going to weigh in at about 115, something like that. Okay, 114. But when you go for another puzzle, let's say for example the GTS2, which is my old main, it is almost 20 grams heavier than the MGC. Having a lighter puzzle means I can have longer sessions, I can turn a little more freely without having to deal with cube fatigue in a way. And finally, before I get into the turning, this puzzle is around 60 to 61 millimeters, can't really tell. I believe it's a little larger than the WRM. But the only thing that's a little more significant is that you don't really see it in the MOU flagships right now. But this used to be a pretty prominent feature in the Chi 4x4s. The outer layers are, you can definitely tell that the outer layers are wider than the inner layers. Okay, so getting into the turning, out of the box, I thought that this was not the sandiest puzzle. I believe I had that impression about their previous puzzles. But out of the box, it was really crunchy. And to be honest, the performance was out of the gates impressive. So the performance, it felt very crunchy. It was pretty loud in my opinion. out of the box it was very loose, and it was loose to the point where I was worried about it popping. Even while I had those tensions on there though, it was actually kind of difficult to take out some pieces. I don't know why, but I would say that's a good thing because the design kind of like goes against the ability to pop even with loose tensions. So that's something to remember out of the box. I wanted to make sure that some of the plastic that was in here kind of gets like broken in with some solves. I just have this paranoia that some budget puzzles really don't have the best plastic quality, and doing these solves before you set it up may really help smooth out whatever plastic slash flash that may exist. And because I mentioned how the internal pieces have flash, it might be worth considering doing. But anyways, I did take it apart, and as you guys already know, I did find that there was some plastic that needed to be addressed by filing it down. It's very minimal, but just something to keep in mind when you take it apart. Please check for that. It does come with factory lubricant. It is only I think it's only within the internal pieces. You know, when you take off this top half of the 4x4, how does this whole circle of internal pieces just flat? That entire section is lube, but the pieces have pretty much no lube except for like residual lube that gets out. So it's very interesting to see how the factory lubricant is applied. That is a consideration that I felt YJ did a really good job of. They didn't just throw in lubricant everywhere like how Diane usually does it. The lubricant was actually placed very precisely, which I do appreciate. So while I'm making sure all the plastic is good, cleaning it out, taking off all the factory lubricant, since it's a 4x4, I didn't bother lubing the metal pieces, the spring and the screw, because if I'm not mistaken, they don't really move that much. But what I did lube was the center ring, so the ring that goes to the stock. I lubed that just so that it would be a little more smooth. I used just a little bit of 50K, and that's basically what I did to lube the core. I put everything back together. I did use a little bit of 50K on 2 small internal pieces and 1 big internal piece just to keep them together while I was putting the 4x4 back together. I did that as a sort of way just to have a little bit of lubricant within the internal pieces just so that the pieces could move smoothly. Also, the lubricant, when it's a thick lubricant, it holds the internal pieces together. I learned that, I believe, from JR Cuber. So being able to use a little bit of lubricant to keep the wings together was actually a pretty good 4x4 hack, so I appreciate that. Okay, so here are my final thoughts on the MGC 4x4. Honestly, it's pretty amazing. Out of the box, it's already pretty much ready to go, honestly. If you want to set it up, you can, but I don't really think a lot of people will want to deviate from the feel that it already provides and the performance. So the biggest thing that you want to change if you want to set it up is the tensions. It's definitely probably going to be too loose for most people. So if you tighten it by like 180 degrees or like 90 degrees at a time, just make sure the tensions are even and just find the tension that's right for you. And then for me, at the tensions I have it right now, I have full confidence that the puzzle is never going to pop. It hasn't, and I feel like I could turn really rough and be really aggressive and it wouldn't have any problems handling that. As far as lubricant goes, just add something really light, you know, something that won't really affect the puzzle too much. Of course, you always can like do whatever you want, experiment. It's just not my recommendation. One of the most important things I wanted to highlight is the corner cutting. So the reverse corner cutting, the small corner cuts that the puzzle can accomplish, in my opinion, it seems that it's better almost outright than the WRM, the GTS2M. It just does everything a little bit better in performance-wise. So the peel-up parodies, the OLA parodies, the edge pairing, all that stuff where it uses a ton of slice moves, they just feel better and it feels smoother, and there's just less grinding feelings that's happening. It's just an overall amazing experience to be able to solve on this puzzle. You know, it's crunchy, it's fast, it's really controllable at the same time. And that's something I wanted to point out too. It's a little more flexible than the GTS2M, sure. And in that case, it's definitely more flexible than the WRM. But the thing about the MGC is that it's not flexible enough to be a problem. It's just flexible enough to where you can actually take advantage of it. It's not going to flop around on you. The magnets keep it in place very well, and the corner cutting is very forgiving, so it actually kind of balances out very nicely. All the features about the puzzle are just very cohesive, and it's like every single aspect of the puzzle is supposed to be with each other, which is something I find really nice coming from YJ. But yeah, I've decided that the MGC 4x4 is going to be my new main. In some ways, it's inspired me to practice 4x4 again. I really don't know, because 4x4 is not really my main event anymore, but I'm going to give it another go because the 4x4 is just feels amazing, you know? So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this review. I hope I could inform you of whether or not you want to buy this puzzle or not. If you do, please check out speedcubeshop.com. And yeah, thank you guys.